You didn't grow up in chaos, you grew up in transition. As a millennial, your childhood belonged to an analog world. You remember landline phones, waiting for your favourite TV show to come on at a specific hour, playing outside until the streetlights flickered on. Life moved slower, mistakes faded, nothing followed you forever. Then, almost without warning, adulthood arrived, and the world had changed. Suddenly everything became digital. Your work, your relationships, your identity. You didn't just enter the internet, you were forced to migrate your entire existence into it. Profiles replaced introductions, metrics replaced meaning, visibility became currency. This is why millennials are often misunderstood. You are not indecisive or fragile. Like, you are a bridge generation, the only generation that had to fully adapt from one world into another while already carrying adult responsibility. Psychologically, this created a rare but costly trait. High adaptability paired with chronic inner instability. You learned how to update yourself constantly. New skills, new identities, new expectations. You learned how to pivot, rebrand, and keep going. But adaptability has a shadow. When you're always adjusting, you rarely feel grounded. When you're always becoming, you rarely feel finished. There is a quiet exhaustion that comes from never knowing which version of you is enough. You remember a world before constant comparison, but you live inside one now. You remember privacy, but you're expected to perform. You remember stability, but you matured into uncertainty. You are not broken. You are simply standing between two worlds and carrying the weight of both, and everything that comes next begins right here. You were not raised on fear, you were raised on hope. As a millennial, the message you heard was simple and repeated often. Work hard, do the right things, and life will take care of you. Go to school, get a degree, be responsible, be patient. Success was framed not as luck, but as a fair exchange. Effort in, stability out. You believed that promise, and more importantly, you organised your life around it. Then, just as you stepped into adulthood, the ground gave way. September 11th shattered the illusion of safety. The 2008 financial crisis arrived as you were forming your professional identity. Jobs disappeared. Careers stalled before they began. Student loan balances grew faster than paychecks. Housing slipped out of reach. The rules you were taught to follow stopped working, but no one officially told you they had changed. Guys, this is where the psychological wound formed. When a system fails but continues to insist it's fair, the damage doesn't stay external. It turns inward. You don't think, this system is broken. You think, something must be wrong with me. This is economic gaslighting, being asked to doubt your own reality while carrying the consequences of a collapse you didn't cause. You worked harder for less security. You delayed milestones, not because you were irresponsible, but because the math no longer added up. Yet the cultural narrative shifted the blame onto you. Lazy, entitled, unrealistic. So you internalized the contradiction. You did everything right, and learned to feel ashamed anyway. That unresolved tension became the background noise of your life, a low-level anxiety that never fully shuts off. Not because you lack resilience, but because you were trained to trust a system that quietly withdrew its promise and left you waiting for a reward that never arrived. This wasn't personal failure. It was a collective betrayal. The anxiety you live with isn't loud. It doesn't always look like panic. Most days it feels like background noise. For millennials, anxiety isn't tied to a single fear. It's tied to uncertainty without an off switch. When stability disappears, the nervous system adapts by staying alert. Not because something is wrong with you, but because something never feels fully safe. You wake up already bracing for the email, the bill, the subtle sense that one mistake could unravel everything. This is what happens when an entire generation grows up without a reliable safety net. Job security became conditional. Healthcare became expensive. Housing became speculative. The future stopped feeling like a place you were moving toward and started feeling like something you had to defend yourself from. Psychologically, your body learned to live in a low-grade fight or flight state. Cortisol never quite drops. Rest doesn't feel restorative. It feels risky. Even on good days, there's a tension humming beneath the surface. And your body remembers. Tight shoulders, a clenched jaw, shallow breathing, sleep that never feels deep enough. These aren't personal weaknesses. They are the physical imprint of long-term uncertainty. What makes this anxiety especially heavy is that it's often invisible. You function, you show up, you get things done. From the outside you look fine. Inside you're constantly calculating how much margin you have, how close you are to the edge. So you tell yourself to calm down, to be grateful, to push through. But this isn't a mindset problem. It's what happens when survival becomes a permanent condition. Your anxiety is not a character flaw. It is the cost of living too long without security and learning to carry that weight quietly. Millennials are the first generation to grow into adulthood with an audience. You didn't just live your 20s, you documented them. Profiles replaced first impressions. Timelines tracked your progress. Likes, views and titles quietly became measures of worth. Even when you weren't trying to compete, comparison found you. Before social media, comparison was limited. You measured yourself against a small circle. Co-workers, neighbours, classmates. Now, your reference group is infinite. Old classmates announcing promotions, strangers launching startups, curated lives unfolding in real time. And the comparison isn't just about success, it's about timing. Who's ahead? Who figured it out first? Who seems relaxed while you feel behind? You start comparing your private confusion to everyone else's public certainty. This is where the psychological trap tightens. Imposter syndrome thrives in this environment. No matter what you achieve, it feels provisional, like you're one misstep away from being exposed. At the same time, FOMO becomes existential. It's not fear of missing a party, it's fear that life itself is happening somewhere else, without you. So you perform stability, you curate resilience, you post proof that you're okay, even when you're not sure what okay means anymore. Living under constant observation reshapes identity. When you're always being seen, it becomes harder to know who you are when no one is watching. Reflection gets replaced by reaction. Authenticity by optimization. This isn't vanity. It's what happens when a generation is asked to build a self while standing under a permanent spotlight. And slowly, comparison stops being something you do. It becomes the environment you breathe in. Millennials are often accused of being narcissistic, too self-focused, too image-obsessed, too concerned with personal branding. But this accusation misunderstands the environment you are forced to survive in. You entered adulthood just as the rules of work collapsed. Stable careers gave way to short contracts, side hustles, and algorithmic visibility. Job security faded, and in its place came a new requirement. You are the product. Your skills weren't enough. You had to package them, promote them, perform them. Self-branding wasn't vanity. It was adaptation. When employers stopped offering loyalty, identity became leverage. You learned to sell your story because not telling it meant being invisible. And invisibility in a crowded digital economy meant vulnerability. What looks like self-obsession from the outside is often deep insecurity, trying to stay afloat. But here is the uncomfortable truth that also needs to be named. Yes, this generation does show higher rates of narcissistic traits than some before it. And that isn't a contradiction, it's part of the same psychological equation. When a system constantly demands visibility, validation, and comparison, some people adapt by turning inward in unhealthy ways. Narcissism, in this context, often develops as a defensive structure, a way to protect fragile self-worth by inflating it. Not all narcissism is grandiose. Much of it is brittle, anxious, and dependent on external affirmation. This is why millennials can be both highly self-aware and deeply self-centered at the same time, both victim and carrier of the same pressure. The real cost isn't judgment, it's erosion. When your identity becomes a brand, you slowly lose access to who you are when nothing is being optimized. And over time, self-presentation replaces self-connection. This isn't a moral failure. It's what happens when survival teaches you that being seen matters more than being whole. Millennials are not exhausted because they are weak. They are exhausted because they never learned how to feel safe while resting. You were raised in the age of hustle. Productivity wasn't just encouraged, it was moralized. Doing more meant being more. Every skill had to be useful. Every passion had to become profitable. Even joy was quietly measured by output. At the same time, the world you were working inside offered very little security in return. Jobs became temporary. Promotions became symbolic. Loyalty stopped being reciprocal. You could work late, give everything, do everything right, and still be let go with a polite email. In that environment, rest stopped feeling like recovery and started feeling like risk. So your nervous system adapted. It learned that slowing down was dangerous. But if you weren't alert, you might fall behind. But if you stopped, something would be taken from you. This is why burnout for millennials isn't just physical fatigue, it's existential depletion. Burnout looks like waking up tired even after sleep, like losing interest in things you once loved, like scrolling instead of resting, because true stillness feels uncomfortable. You don't relax, you hover. Even self-care became another obligation. Meditation apps, morning routines, wellness checklists. The language of healing was absorbed by the same productivity logic that caused the exhaustion in the first place. Rest became something to optimize, not something to receive. Underneath it all is a nervous system stuck in fight or flight. Cortisol stays elevated. The body never fully powers down. And when your baseline is tension, peace can feel unfamiliar, even unsafe. This is why so many millennials feel guilty when doing nothing. Why weekends don't restore them. Why joy feels fleeting and fragile. You aren't burned out because you don't care enough. You're burned out because you cared for too long in a system that never promised to care back. And learning how to rest now isn't laziness. It's unlearning survival. To understand the millennial psyche, you have to look back, quietly, without blame, at the homes many of you grew up in. A large number of millennials were shaped by instability long before adulthood. Divorce became common. Dual income households became necessary. Many parents were overwhelmed, emotionally unavailable, or unknowingly anxious about your future. Love was present, but often inconsistent, conditional or distracted. Some of you grew up with pressure. Every grade mattered. Every activity was scheduled. Failure felt catastrophic. Others grew up with absence. Parents physically or emotionally checked out, leaving you to grow up faster than you should have. Different environments, same result, uncertainty about emotional safety. This is where attachment patterns quietly formed. And many millennials developed anxious attachment, always scanning for signs of abandonment, needing reassurance but never fully trusting it. Others learned avoidant attachment, valuing independence, downplaying needs, pulling away when closeness feels overwhelming. And many carry a mix of both. The common thread is emotional hunger. You learned early that love had conditions, that approval had to be earned, that being easy was safer than being needy. As adults, this shows up in familiar ways: overgiving, people-pleasing, difficulty setting boundaries, or choosing partners who feel distant but familiar. Not because you enjoy pain, but because your nervous system recognizes the pattern. The subconscious isn't drawn to what's healthy, it's drawn to what's known. Yet there is something quietly revolutionary about this generation. And millennials are often the first to ask, is this normal? The first to name trauma, the first to question inherited patterns instead of blindly repeating them. That awareness doesn't erase the wounds, but it creates the possibility of change. And for many of you, that's where the cycle begins to break. From the outside, it looks like millennials are avoiding commitment, marrying later, having children later, hesitating when others expect certainty. But this hesitation isn't indifference, it's reverence. Many millennials grew up watching relationships that looked stable on paper, but felt hollow in reality. Parents who stayed together out of obligation, arguments held behind closed doors, emotional distance normalized as adulthood. You learned early that marriage alone doesn't guarantee safety or love, so you became careful. You don't just want a partner, you want alignment. You want intimacy without erasure, commitment without self-betrayal. And in a world where financial stability is fragile and emotional skills were never formally taught, that feels like a high-stakes decision. There is also grief here, a grief for timelines that didn't unfold as promised, for the quiet pressure of watching peers move ahead while you're still waiting to feel ready, for wanting love deeply, yet fearing that choosing the wrong person could cost you years, or yourself. The core tension is simple but heavy. I want connection, but I don't want to disappear inside it. So you pause, you reflect, you wait longer than generations before you. Not because you don't value family, but because you value it enough to be afraid of doing it wrong. This isn't fear of love, it's fear of repeating pain, and finally understanding the price of pretending everything is fine. Millennials are often called the therapy generation, and in many ways, that's true. You are the first generation to openly talk about anxiety, depression, trauma, and attachment. You normalize therapy. You learn the language your parents never had. You ask questions that were once considered uncomfortable or unnecessary. Why does this hurt? Where did this pattern come from? Does it have to stay this way? That awareness matters. It allowed you to name experiences that were previously dismissed. It gave context to pain that once felt personal and shameful. It created permission to seek help instead of silently enduring. But awareness has a shadow. Understanding your wounds doesn't automatically heal them. Knowing the terminology doesn't always change the nervous system. For many millennials, insight became a form of protection, analyzing instead of feeling, explaining instead of resting. At times, self-reflection turned into self-surveillance. You learned to label every reaction, to trace every trigger back to childhood, to wonder whether each emotion was healthy or trauma-based. And without realizing it, healing became another performance, another project to manage, optimize and get right. There's also the risk of self-diagnosis, of identifying so strongly with pain that it becomes identity instead of information. Awareness without integration can leave you stuck in understanding without relief. Still, this generation deserves credit for something profound. You broke the silence. You challenged the idea that suffering is normal and help is weakness. Even when the process is messy, incomplete and imperfect, as you change the cultural conversation, the task now isn't more insight, it's learning how to let safety, slowness and embodiment catch up with everything you already know. Healing isn't about knowing more, it's about feeling less alone inside what you already understand. If you are a millennial listening to this, there is something important you need to hear. You are not failing. You are carrying weight that was never designed to be carried alone. You were handed a broken map and told to find your way anyway. You absorbed economic collapse, cultural acceleration, emotional neglect, and digital overload, often at the same time. It makes sense that you feel tired. It makes sense that you question yourself. That exhaustion isn't weakness. It's the cost of adaptation. But there is another truth beneath it. Millennials are not the lost generation. You are the cycle breakers. You're the first to look at inherited pain and say, this stops with me. You questioned parenting styles, work cultures, relationship dynamics, and emotional silence that were passed down unquestioned for decades. You learned the language of healing not because it was trendy, but because it was necessary. The work you're doing is largely invisible. It doesn't always come with milestones or applause, but it matters. When you choose awareness over denial, boundaries over endurance, and honesty over appearance, you reduce the weight for those who come after you. That is what this exhaustion is really for. So give yourself some grace. You are not behind. You are rebuilding on unstable ground with more consciousness than any generation before you. If this video made you feel seen, you're not alone. Share your experience in the comments. What part of the millennial experience resonated with you most? The burnout, the anxiety, the relationships, or the pressure to keep going? And if you want to explore these psychological patterns more deeply, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. We talk about the quiet truths of the human experience here, and there's more coming. Thank you for being here.